David Eli Ruffin was born on January 18, 1941, in the small town of Wynot, Mississippi. His father, a strict Baptist minister, preached fire and brimstone on Sundays, while his mother died when David was still very young. In many ways, his upbringing was typical of poor Southern families in the 1940s. Money was scarce, and life revolved around church. But there was one powerful saving grace: music. His father's church services featured spirited gospel singing, and from his first moments in that wooden pew, David was captivated by the promise of what a voice could do. He'd see the congregation move to tears or joyful exclamations just by the right note at the right time. Even as a small boy, he dreamed of making a crowd feel that kind of emotion. By the time David was 5 or 6, folks noticed that he had more than just a passing interest in singing. He also seemed gifted. He'd belt out hymns with a pure, soulful edge that felt wise beyond his years. That raw talent wasn't always easy to nurture, though. His father was a proud man, set in his ways, and not always supportive of a young boy's showy ambitions. Discipline was harsh in the Ruffin household, often crossing into painful punishments. Despite that, David's determination to sing only grew stronger. He'd sneak out to local music gatherings, or any place where he could soak up the rhythms of gospel, R&B, and even country tunes that crackled over the radio late at night. Around the age of 13, David left home in hopes of finding more fertile ground for his musical aspirations. He drifted, sang in traveling gospel groups, and occasionally found day work to make ends meet. He moved from one small gig to another, singing in churches, tent revivals, and clubs that catered to the gospel R&B crossover scenes so popular in the South at the time. Those rough years on the road toughened him up. He learned stage presence from older performers, how to command a crowd's attention, how to deliver a lyric like it was a sermon. But the road was lonely and unpredictable, with little money coming in, and the risk of exploitation around every corner. David persevered because he believed in his voice, believed it could carry him out of obscurity if he just kept pushing. Eventually, he landed in Detroit, the city that would define the rest of his life. In the late 1950s and early 60s, Detroit was a magnet for ambitious musicians hoping to catch the ear of Motown Records, the label that was rapidly changing the face of popular music. The city's clubs vibrated with a new kind of energy, and the dream of being discovered by Berry Gordy, Motown's founder, seemed within reach if you had the right combination of talent, looks, and luck. David started performing in local combos and auditioning for anyone who would listen. He faced rejections, but he kept singing, unwavering in his belief that the big break would come. In 1964, that break arrived. The Temptations, a rising vocal group under the Motown umbrella, had recently lost one of their members. David got wind of the vacancy through a friend. At the time, the Temptations had scored a few modest hits, but hadn't quite reached the pinnacle of stardom. Berry Gordy believed they were on the cusp of something big, given the right lineup and the right material. When David auditioned, the group members recognized a special spark in him, an unmistakable gritty tenor that could soar on high notes and drop to a seductive purr. He also had an undeniable presence. Though somewhat reserved off stage, he commanded attention once he began to sing. He joined the Temptations, initially not as lead, but as part of the ensemble. However, it didn't take long for the Motown production team, particularly Smokey Robinson, to notice that David's voice could be the secret ingredient they'd been searching for. Smokey wrote My Girl, featuring David Ruffin on lead vocals, and in late 1964, it was released to the public. The result was a cultural explosion. My Girl soared to #1, one on the Billboard charts, becoming one of Motown's most iconic hits and the Temptations' signature tune. Suddenly, David was front and center, the new face and voice of the group. The shy newcomer from Why Not, Mississippi, had transformed into a bona fide star, known for his dramatic stage moves, his suave style, and that piercing look he'd give the camera right before nailing a high note. What followed was a flurry of hits. Since I Lost My Baby, Ain't Too Proud to Beg, Beauty Is Only Skin Deep, and I Wish It Would Rain, among many others. The Temptations became Motown's golden boys, bridging gospel-inflected soul with a pop polish that resonated across racial lines during a turbulent period of American history. They performed on television shows, traveled overseas, and played to sold-out crowds. David's distinctive voice soon became a hallmark of the Temptations' sound, emotive, earthy, and capable of sending chills down your spine. Meanwhile, Berry Gordy and Motown's publicity machine presented them as clean-cut gentlemen, always well-dressed in matching suits, delivering choreographed routines so sharp that audiences often sat in awe. Behind the scenes, though, success stirred up tensions and personal demons. David grew increasingly aware that he was a central part of the Temptations' success. Fans clamored for him, wanting to hear that husky, vulnerable voice in person. He began missing rehearsals, occasionally showing up late for performances, believing he deserved better financial deals and more respect. Motown was known for controlling its artists' careers with an iron grip, and David, from a young age, was always resistant to authority. Conflict started to brew. Some group members were frustrated with his growing ego and erratic behavior, while David felt the label, and the group didn't appreciate his full worth. Part of David's erratic behavior was fueled by new temptations, fame, money, and especially drugs. Cocaine began circulating among certain circles in the music business, offering an enticing escape from the pressures of constant touring and from the personal insecurities that lurked beneath David's confident stage persona. Soon, David found himself in the quicksand of addiction. Cocaine gave him highs that made him feel untouchable, but it also led to destructive lows. His performances sometimes suffered, and his relationships with the Temptations grew strained. By 1968, the tension reached a breaking point. Tired of the drama, the group and Motown parted ways with David. David attempted to launch a solo career, convinced that his star power would still shine without the group. He recorded tracks at Motown that had moments of brilliance. Songs like My Whole World Ended, The Moment You Left Me, charted decently, and reminded listeners why they fell in love with his voice in the first place. That single reached number 1, 9 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1969, a respectable showing. But behind that mild success lay the gnawing reality that David's personal life was spinning out of control. Though he still had a fan base, major hits were elusive. Motown's promotional support was lukewarm, possibly due to the bad blood from his split with the Temptations. By the early 1970s, new trends in music emerged: funk, psychedelic soul, and socially conscious R&B started dominating the airwaves. David tried to adapt, but his sporadic bouts of unreliability made record labels wary. Drug abuse escalated. He found himself tangled in legal troubles and personal feuds, turning up in the tabloids more for scandal than for new music. Meanwhile, the Temptations moved on with a fresh lineup, scoring additional hits, though fans who loved David's era always held a special place for his voice. Despite the chaos, David never fully disappeared. He'd pop up with a stirring performance at small clubs or put out a track showcasing glimpses of that old magic. In the late 1970s, he even reunited briefly with the Temptations for special occasions, stirring fan excitement and speculation about a full-time return. But the underlying issues, his pride, his addiction, and the group's distrust always derailed any sustained reunion. The heartbreak was mutual. Fans wanted that synergy back, but the same personal demons that had driven them apart remained unresolved. By the 1980s, David's battles with addiction took a darker turn. Cocaine and other substances overshadowed his attempts to reestablish a stable life. He had multiple run-ins with the law, arrest warrants for unpaid child support, and rehab stints that often ended in relapse. Yet in fleeting moments, especially on stage, he could still captivate a room like no one else. Music insiders continued to remark on how, even with years of hard living under his belt, David's voice retained that soulful ache that made him a Motown legend. All the same, these brilliant moments were overshadowed by cancellations, missed opportunities, and the general sense that David was lost in a spiral he couldn't control. Throughout these years, David's personal life was no more settled. He fathered several children and had relationships that suffered under the weight of his addiction. There's a poignant anecdote about how he'd be sweet and loving one moment, especially around children, then distant or agitated the next, particularly when he was under the influence. Family members and close friends recognized a deep well of kindness in him. They recalled how he'd sometimes get tears in his eyes, talking about old gospel songs or the mother he lost so early in life. Yet that gentle side was in constant conflict with the chaotic pull of drugs and unresolved trauma. In the late 1980s, David found a flicker of hope. The Temptations' classic lineup was experiencing a revival in popularity, thanks to nostalgia tours and the unstoppable charm of old-school R&B. One special event in 1982 had David perform with the group on a Motown anniversary television special, reuniting him with Eddie Kendricks, Otis Williams, and others. The crowd went wild, and for a moment it seemed like the old magic could resurrect his career. He capitalized on that momentum by touring with Eddie Kendricks. Their shows were hits with fans who yearned to hear those classic voices together again. Eddie's smooth falsetto and David's rough-edged tenor were still a magnificent pairing. But even amid these glimpses of success, David's demons never fully loosened their grip. As the 1990s approached, David remained a revered figure in the soul community, if a tragic one. Young R&B artists cited him as a major influence on how to interpret ballads with raw emotion. Some up-and-coming singers even sought him out for advice. Behind closed doors, though, David's health was declining. Years of substance abuse had taken a heavy toll. He struggled with respiratory issues, a weakened immune system, and the looming threat that any overdose could be his last. Yet there was always that flicker of hope that he might turn it around. He'd bounce back just enough to record a new demo or appear in a small venue, mesmerizing fans who might not have seen him in decades. That hope was dashed on June 1st, 1991. David Ruffin was pronounced dead at a hospital in Philadelphia. The cause eventually confirmed as an accidental drug overdose. He was just 50 years old. The news sent shockwaves through the music world. Tributes poured in from fellow Motown legends, soul singers, and everyday folks who wanted to express their gratitude for a voice that had given them so much joy, yet ended in so much sorrow. The funeral service was marked by an outpouring of grief and reflection. Smokey Robinson, who had written David's signature hit, expressed heartbreak at the loss of someone whose talent was so immense, yet whose life had been so tumultuous. If we look at David Ruffin's legacy, it's clear that his contributions to modern music remain enormous. My Girl is still considered one of the greatest songs of all time, often used in films, commercials, and personal celebrations like weddings and anniversaries. The moment you hear David's bright, confident opening lines, you're transported to an era when Motown reigned supreme. But beyond that single track, David was a vocal innovator who influenced countless artists in R&B, pop, and even rock. His technique, merging churchy power, gritty emotional honesty, and polished showmanship, became a template for soul singers everywhere. People like Al Green, Ronald Isley, and even Michael Jackson drew inspiration from how David shaped a melody and infused it with genuine feeling. There are lesser-known stories about David's generosity and kindness. Close friends remember times he gave away money to struggling acquaintances, or how he quietly paid someone's bills when they were down and out, never seeking recognition. He was also known to slip into small churches, unannounced, usually in neighborhoods where the choir sang the old-time gospel he grew up with, just to hear that sound that first fueled his dreams. Sometimes he'd even join in, to the utter surprise of the congregation who'd suddenly realize they were being serenaded by the legendary David Ruffin. After David's death, there was a wave of reflection within the Motown family. Members of the Temptations openly mourned the fact that personal differences had kept them apart so long. The group dedicated songs to him in their concerts. Fans flooded radio stations with requests for David's hits. The various Motown tribute events that followed turned into celebrations of the golden era of soul, where David's face and voice inevitably took center stage. People posted heartfelt notes in R&B forums and snail-mailed letters to magazines, recalling how they had slow danced to My Girl at their prom, or how David's voice gave them hope during tough times. Perhaps one of the most moving anecdotes about David comes from an older woman who once wrote a letter to a music magazine after his death. She said that when she was a teenager, she'd attended a Temptations show with her disabled sister. They arrived early, hoping to get a glimpse of the band. David noticed the sister's wheelchair and walked over, kneeling down to talk with her for a few minutes before the concert. He asked about her favorite songs, told her she looked lovely, and promised to dedicate My Girl to her that night. He kept his word, and for that young woman, it became a cherished memory she carried for decades. The letter concluded by saying that, despite everything that happened later in his life, she'd always remember David as the gentle man who gave her sister the sweetest gift, a sense of being special and included. Thank you for spending this time with me, revisiting the highs and lows of David Ruffin's journey. If his music ever lifted your spirits, or if you have a special memory tied to one of the Temptations classics, I invite you to share those stories. Sometimes it's in reminiscing that we keep the best parts of an artist alive. May we carry forward David's better qualities, his creativity, his passion, and learn from the darker lessons his life teaches about the perils of fame and the heartbreak of addiction. As we listen to My Girl or any of his other timeless performances, let's remember him not just for the tragedy, but also for the love and warmth he gave us through his unforgettable voice.